Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask a hell of a lot of questions. And you can also become a bitter pill on patreon.com. We are also available on all the usual suspects, Podcast Addict, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, all that stuff. So where you could listen for free and your devices, although on a personal level, I would recommend Podcast Addict because it turns all your podcasts into a big Netflix site, which is kind of convenient. So there's that. My little shameless plug for the day. My guest today is a friend of the show, been on before. He is a veteran who has served in Kosovo and South Korea. Chris Ward just got back from India, and we're going to talk about a lot of various and sundry things that will give you some fun facts to know and tell at parties. Chris, are you there?
I am. It's always an honor to be invited onto the show. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you for coming on, man. It's an honor to have someone such as yourself, because then you make me sound smart. But hey, let's jump into it. So, when did you get back from India?
That was January 25th.
Okay. And are you able to discuss the nature of your trip, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, following my... I'd spent 11 years in the Army, and when I got out, I had made a friend who was a former Special Forces guy who was providing security for he's a certified public accountant and a banker who is of Indian descent, a gentleman out of California. So he asked me because he didn't want to provide being a bodyguard anymore, so he asked me if I'd be interested in going to India. So I did. My first trip to India was in 2006. I spent 3.5 months there, mostly getting a feel for the land. A lot of it was just prepping, doing my reconnaissance, creating a security assessment and everything for the principal to arrive. And then I've been with the same guy now for 12 years. I go back to India about every 6 months.
Wow. And different assignments, or kind of like you guys rotate out for the same person?
Same guy every time.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's cool. Then you know his movements and there's no surprises, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Wow, that's very cool. So let's kind of, I guess, start from now and work backward a little bit. So Narendra Modi has been having some challenges, and kind of, I'm guessing right wing, right?
Very much so.
And what? Oh, God, I'm sorry.
He's up for re-election this year, and so he is, of course, doing his the rally cry around the state of India, trying to get garner support. But from his last campaign in 2014, when he won, he had made a lot of lofty promises to the people of India, and that's been the greatest ammunition for the opposition this far, is that he hasn't fulfilled, but a fraction, let alone just marred by accusations of corruption throughout his campaign. Nothing that he personally has directed in, but that he would definitely have knowledge of, has kind of tarnished his image.
Okay, and then what kind of, is he cracking down, or what is he doing? Well, first of all, are people protesting him at all?
Not so much. I haven't seen any protests. It's more just the opposition leaders are, doing their, because we're in the midst of a campaign, so there's a lot of it. But we saw just from 2014, the media doesn't. To what level he has buy-in of the corporate media, if you would, in India, mm-hmm. There's never been a bad story spoken about Modi up until recently, where when the opposition's speaking, they're kind of getting it. So it is kind of attacks on his character, but nothing that I've seen as far as widespread protests against him.
Right. And then the corporate media there, is it like here where they just kind of, trade in high-end gossip and think it's policy? I mean, like teabagging a stripper.
That's all it is.
Okay, yeah, because teabagging a stripper is not exactly, tariffs. Right? So I was just wondering, like, do they get into failures of policy? Do they get, or do they just kind of trade in the fact that, maybe he had a hooker or something? I mean, what do they, what is it in India?
No, it's definitely not that. It's mostly it just has to deal with the fact that you've got a strongly povertous nation who one of his promises during his campaign is that there would be like, I think 14 or 15 lakh of rupees, which is something like 140,000 rupees would be in everybody's bank account by about this time. And so now everybody's like, well, hey, where's that money you promised me? And what he was trying to say is that there would be this large influx of jobs and opportunities across India, and they've just not been unable to kind of get over the lack of development in both infrastructure and creating new jobs. And because of that lack of infrastructure and a political, if anybody that understands looks at it from a business point, is that India still runs on the British system. And so their political process, if you wanted to get, a bill done, or if you wanted to get even zoning changes, it would take years in order to implement a zoning change. And so a lot of corporations, are very hesitant about investing and developing in India, where they still have, roads that they do. I mean, the major highways, that was one thing that Modi really was able to do when I met Narendra Modi as the chief minister in Gujarat when I was there back in 2013. And got a picture with him and everything.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that he did
really quick,
was he created...
yeah, go ahead. Really quick, what's the Gudra moving forward? I'm sorry.
What is the what?
The Gudra? You said he was the minister of the Gudra?
Oh no, he was chief minister of Gujarat, which is one of the states in India.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Okay, and continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. No, the states are a little hard to pronounce sometimes, and it gets difficult. So Gujarat is one of the greener states, if you will. Bar none, not one of the most, I would say, economically viable states. But what Modi did as chief minister was the first thing they did was corrected all the highways leading out of the major cities. So if you were to land at the airport and start driving away, you'd be like, wow, this looks amazing. Manicured roads, great, there's beautiful statues at all the roundabouts. So it gives you the impression that Gujarat, from a third party, has really turned around. And that was the kind of the promise. He's like, as soon as I become prime minister, all of India is going to have this. We're going to make all of India look like this little patch of land right here, of which he never fulfilled. I mean, we have a few major superhighways that lead out from Delhi to Agra, which 10 years ago was a nightmare of a road. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Agra, that's where the home of the Taj Mahal is. And so a lot of tourists that would come into Delhi, you had the option of driving to the Taj Mahal, but it was about a 5 or 6 hour trip across a bumpy dirt road that was the most painful trip ever. And they put in a superhighway now that is awesome. You can get from Delhi to Agra in about 2 hours. And they've extended this superhighway across to other, what I would call tourist attractions. So you can drive all the way across India now down into even Goa, which is just south of Maharashtra, the home state of Mumbai, which a lot of people are familiar with.
Right. Wow. So, okay, kind of backing up a hot second. So you said something interesting when Modi ran for office initially, and everyone's complaining about the 140,000 rupees they didn't get. You said something to the effect of now he said, like, was this in his words when he's saying, well, what I was trying to say is when the jobs come, then you'll get the rupees, or did he really actually promise that everyone was going to just get a deposit?
No, I think without being able to quote exactly what that is, I want to say he specifically said you will have 14 lakhs in your bank account.
Okay. And 14 lakhs is how
That's
many?
what I think you said.
And 14 lakhs is how much?
That I want to say, just doing the math, is about $20,000.
Okay, well that's not chump change. I mean, I'm sure if if somebody gave me $20,000, I wouldn't punch him. Right. I mean, so
I might have a zero off. No, I think it's about $2,000.
2,000. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say that because in India,
sorry, it was off a zero.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's cool. Well, it's still $2,000. If it's not parsed out every month, that's actually that's not an insignificant chunk of change just to have just put there. I mean, that helps with, especially in India, right? I mean, because it's not like the poor in America, is it?
No, not at all.
I mean, like
no,
I watched a video.
Example, I was telling when we were having this conversation the other day. I was just telling you, like, a friend of mine in Mumbai has this small concrete cubicle where the whole year's rent is $1,000.
Right.
Or no, I'm sorry, $2,000.
Right. See, and then you made this video that I'm going to attach to the body of the show, where you interviewed that young lady who's trying to. And I was going to ask you about that. Why was she saving up for her own dowry? Shouldn't the man be paying for the dowry?
You would think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an amazing system that they have over there. But essentially, it was actually, for those of you that are familiar with the challenges in India, one of the things that really took me back was one day I was looking at the newspaper. I think it was like the Delhi Times, and on the cover there was honestly like a PSA saying, "Hey, the fire stations have boxes that you can put your baby daughters in, as opposed to throwing them in the trash." And it just took me. I was like, "What the heck?"
Yeah.
I was not aware that in India, the daughters are essentially, when they're born, are kind of seen as a liability, because whenever they get married, if you were to marry off your daughter, the family has to pay a dowry to the husband or the husband's family. And so if it were a very poor family, they would see this as a future liability, so they would just throw away the daughter. Just throw them in the trash. And it's amazing. Now, the other thing is that, they still, practice arranged marriages over there, which
right.
When I first heard that, I thought that was god awful. I was like, there's no way, I could ever endorse an arranged marriage. But when I broke it down, I looked at it in detail, it made a lot of sense, because before you marry off the daughter, now this doesn't happen in rural India at all, but in the more, middle to upper class India, what they would do is, if I were to marry off my daughter, first there would be, a meeting of the parents to discuss, just everything, and then the kids would meet, and then they would honestly audit the husband's financials,
right?
Because it's not intended that the daughter is going to go into the workforce,
right?
It's intended that the husband's going to take care of the daughter. So I would audit your books just to make sure that you could honestly take care of my daughter before I would ever allow you to marry her.
Right.
Now, again, that doesn't happen in rural India.
Right.
Rural India, they're really just trying to get married so that they can have kids and just continue.
No, well, I mean, and that's what's really funny.
Spread life.
Well, that's when I saw the video. I was kind of taken aback because, I'm half Arab, my dad's side, and me and my brothers, my cousins, a lot of us didn't participate in that crap, but we watched our older cousins when we were kids do the arranged marriage thing, and it was always the dude paid for the dowry, and it was always in gold. It wasn't a check. It was like you got tons of Middle Eastern gold. That was pure gold, not plated. Like a chick would get $20,000-$30,000 in gold, bracelets, necklaces, name it, but it was all made out of gold. And then they would audit the guy, and if he didn't pass muster, it was like you lost your deposit. So you wanted to make sure you're going to pass muster or whatever. And then they used to also do this thing. We can laugh about it now, but most of my dad's side of the family, they're married to first cousins, right? And a good half of them. And he's from the West Bank, and he's from a pretty rural part of the West Bank where they really do that. I don't know if they do it so much like in Jerusalem and stuff like that, but definitely where my dad came from. And so, but in the States, what they would do, because I remember when I was little, my dad would drive some guy off the boat, cousin of mine or something, who's going to get married or whatever, and they had to go get it. And a couple of times I remember, the whole thing went away because the blood tests didn't come back right. Because if you got the same type blood or, certain combinations that you're guaranteeing, a disadvantage for the child kind of a deal, like Down syndrome, that kind of thing. And so they're like, yeah, can't do it. Sorry. You're both type A or whatever,
Wow.
and the thing would go away. And because there was no emotional investment, it was kind of a business transaction. The guy's like, oh, okay, well, on to the next, and it wasn't like this. But the other point I was going to make with the arranged marriage thing, statistically, about as successful as the way we do it. They got about a 60% divorce rate too. So anyway, but not to get into these social aspects too much. So working backwards. Okay, so how did India get here? Because obviously it's extreme poverty. Poor people in India are not like poor people in the U.S. People seem to forget. Even our homeless people here, are better off and have more access to foods and services, do they not, compared to, say, in India?
Absolutely.
And then,
so,
go ahead.
To say where it started, you would have to, go back to probably the British occupation of India. And, of course, it started with the trade. That's how they colonized most countries. It's just like they started the trading, and then they found out that India at the time was probably the largest, probably the wealthiest as far as gold and silver and mineral and, so on and so forth, that in the world. So they were like, well, we got to go in and take over this. So there's actually, there was a letter from the British House of Commons, and I'd have to go back and find it, but I want to say it was sometime in probably the middle 1800s. Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing letter that said, basically, here was their plan, is that we're going to make the Hindus believe that the British way is the best way and that everything that they do is archaic. And even though, so they honestly went in and just kind of destroyed their national identity, replaced it with their own, everything from their political system, their government, systems of law, and everything, and just made them believe truly that the British had the best system in the world. And they bought it hook, line, and sinker because they were very divided. At the time, they still had kings spread throughout India over different. As a matter of fact, I know personally one of the heirs, King Sam Gaikwad of Baroda. So he's part of the Baroda kingdom. So he still resides in his palace. I was just there last month, and it's just funny to me when you're meeting a king, because now it's almost laughable.
Yeah.
Because his empire spans all of like 20 acres. So nowhere near what you would think. And so, and he's one too that, his empire's kind of ended in ruin. He went from the richest empire in India to now selling off acreage on his property to a hotel, to build up a hotel there so that tourists can come. And that's what it is. The palace is opened up. You can go through with your headphones and little, thing explaining the castle. And, it's a beautiful place. I have pictures of it, I think, on Facebook. But over the period of time, it was leading up until the famed March for Independence that, Gandhi had led, early, in the mid 1900s, which ultimately resulted in, the British abandoning it there and, with a lack of identity and a power vacuum, left India in shambles.
Right.
So, it's still there. When you're talking to rural Indians, they have this big belief that essentially the more they suffer in this life, the better off they'll be in the next one.
Right, right.
And so the poor people have zero hope that there's a better life ahead of them. Mm. Now, contrast that with what Narendra Modi believed, because Narendra Modi, I've met his mother. I've been in his parents' house in Ahmedabad, and it's amazing to me that you go from a man whose father was selling like snacks in a little cart on a corner road to becoming the prime minister of India, that is not an environment that natures that type of leadership.
Right.
And so, I sadly have to say that he's awarded, he's traditionally been recognized as the greatest democratic leader of all time, coming from humble beginnings. But I know India, and the corruption is so far in their blood, you don't amass that much power without greasing some skids.
Yeah, I mean, he's been at it because he's been at it for so long. I mean, I looked him up last week when we were talking, and he's been in politics a long ass time. I mean, being prime minister is not his first rodeo, right?
Not at all. Like I said, he was the chief minister of Gujarat before that.
Right. And then he had served in a couple of cabinet positions before that, didn't he?
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know exactly what positions he held off the top of my head, but absolutely.
And it's funny. I looked up his net worth. You want to know how much his net worth is for all that trouble?
How much?
$320,000 American.
How much?
$320,000 American.
Yeah,
that's his net worth. I mean, Bernie Sanders.
That's what we know about.
Yeah, that's what we know about. Bernie Sanders. He's probably one of the poorest guys in the Senate. After a lifetime of just working and putting some money away, maybe I think he has a house. His net worth is like $3.5 million. And that includes probably his 401k or what. After 35 odd years in the house. I mean, that's been his job, right? So, but the other thing I was going to ask you, so after Gandhi. Because Gandhi is so lionized, but even Gandhi wasn't Gandhi. But after that, did the government? How long did it take for the government to start to formalize itself to begin systems to help the people? Would you say?
Well, I'd have to the exact year. So the father, and as a matter of fact, if you were to go to India, I would say someone that is revered as a greater. What's the word? Kind of like hero of the nation would be Dr. Ambedkar.
Okay.
And so he is the father of the modern day, the Declaration of Independence in India.
Okay.
So he wrote it. Now, it's basically, he looked over at the American, Declaration and just kind of created the new one based on the American one. But he was another one that was, an economist and politician that really was the one that rallied everybody synergistically to creating the state of India. So, before that, we had divided Pakistan and India. So that was part of, and a lot of people that I think I mentioned to you before see Gandhi as kind of the criminal in the story of Indian independence because they believe that he was this is strongly believed across India, is that he was actually an agent working for Britain. And so, he had avoided, in protest where a lot of Indians were killed and jailed, he was somehow dragged away in silence, unscathed by his, captors. And whatever they drew the line, they're saying that Gandhi was responsible for drawing the line between India and Pakistan.
Right.
The conflict there on drawing the line resulted in the death of about 10,000 Hindustanians, if you would. Mm-hmm. And so, it's kind of like every decision has a, cause and effect. And, I liken it to when the British lost control of the United States. They had that line of demarcation that prevented the colonists from traveling west. And a lot of that was to protect the indigenous people. Well, that line disappeared, and we know about the mass murder, the genocide that occurred after the United States won its independence. So that was a result of something we celebrate every 4th of July.
Right, right. Well, and so I kind of jump ahead a little bit because I was going to ask him how. when Pakistan, obviously Pakistan is Pakistan now, but when they got started in 47, same year as Israel, actually, how much, you just mentioned the 10,000 Hindustanis, which was a good name. How much bloodshed to get Pakistan started occurred compared to, say, getting Israel started? I mean, was Pakistan pretty bloodless? Was it tens of thousands of people? I mean, how many people died starting Pakistan?
That I would have to look up. I'm not very familiar with the Pakistani history.
Yeah, neither am I.
How it's been.
Yeah, the only reason
I know it's largely divided because of the, it's always been deemed as a terrorist state. But the challenge is that it's just like Afghanistan in the fact that you have a large population of people that are trying to thwart the Islamic extremists, the terrorist cells that operate in those states. So as it is a challenge for me to call Pakistan and Afghanistan terrorist states, there are large, support for Islamic extremism,
sure.
Or what we would call terrorism, in both those. But
right.
As far as how they were able to coalesce as a country in Pakistan, I have no idea. I remember I was there in India when their former prime minister, I can't remember her name.
Benazir Bhutto.
But what's that?
Benazir Bhutto.
Yes, I was watching TV during the parade, and I remember thinking, she's already got imminent death threat, and here she is sitting on top of a car in a crowded parade. I was like, you don't throw chance to the wind more so than that. And then boom, somebody walks up behind her and shoots her in the back of the head.
The only thing I know about Pakistan, really, I mean, I know how it got started, kind of. I know it was a exodus of Muslims that were tired of living, whatever, and kind of from what I understood, it was kind of a manufactured issue. Supposedly, they were all coexisting pretty well until some guys got an idea, hey, let's have our own country. We should be Muslims. We should be apart from this. But other than that, I think they set the record in assassinations and people running for office being assassinated because Ullah in the 70s hung his predecessor in a coup who happened to be Benazir Bhutto's dad. And then she was prime minister in the 80s because I remember that was a big deal. She was the first woman prime minister in the Middle East, much less one of the first women prime ministers. I think Indira Gandhi was probably the second after Golda Meir, I want to say. But long story short is, so she was prime minister for 2 terms, bounced out. Her husband had, served a bunch of parliamentary positions. I think he was a representative or a senator, kind of equivalent to ours, whatever. And then when she ran again, but man, they shoot people quick if they don't like you running, and they get away with it. And then and then they've assassinated, I think, assassinated and or pulled a coup. I'm I think 8 or 10 people. I mean, wasn't Indira Gandhi assassinated
by her own bodyguard?
Yeah. What a bitch, mate. I mean, seriously, she must have been really mean lady. Didn't know Christmas bonuses or whatever Hindu version of that is. There's no rupees for you. Ah, fuck you. Bang, I know. But so Pakistan's kind of like the Wild West. And I guess my question is, you kind of answered because you said, but I was wondering, and we can just bounce this back to India too. But how shitty is our history with Pakistan? You mentioned terror state. I think that's a term that gets thrown around a lot. The United States isn't called a terror state. Saudi Arabia is not called a terror state. Israel's not called a terror state. Iran gets called a terror state. Pakistan gets called a terror. People that we don't like get called a terror state. What's our history fucking about with India? Do we do a lot of that, or we just sort of leave them alone?
So whenever we made the decision, I want to say it's probably been during George Bush Sr.'s realm, and I'll have to look at the history books on this, but I can remember very vividly that there was a time where we decided that we were going to invest in China. And we thought that we were going to increase, we kind of took a gamble that we were going to help China. And that's why I think, 25% of China's economy is because of the United States right now. So whenever people say the U.S. and China are going to go to war, they can never go to war because our two economies are so intermingled that there's no way we could ever go to war with each other.
Right.
We may play like Cold War games, but there'll never be a battle royale between the U.S. and China.
Right.
So the challenge is that we took our eyes off and we didn't invest in India. So now we are, because when we saw that you have China and Russia both biting for the love. I mean, every time I go there, I'll see Russian and Chinese, representatives running all over Delhi and Mumbai because they're trying to gain favor, and I think, you had mentioned before the call, just talking about Saudi Arabia. Everybody's trying to get in there to garner India's support because India could easily goose step right into Chinese rule, or at least be like in Chinese or Russian favor. And if we lose India to a coalesced, because we've seen China and Russia working very closely together for a decade plus. I mean, they even did like this military march together to kind of show them their mutual might. And it got like a blip on the American news media, but I was like, folks, this is significant, and I know more. I don't demonize like a lot of my compatriots. They're like, they fear the red giant, and I say, listen, I love China. I've been there several times and I've enjoyed every trip to China. I think that it's a lot of fear mongering, on that part. Same way with Russia. Like the Cold War's over. We've got probably, as many Russians living here as living in St. Petersburg. More than likely. Right. So what we've done with India is that now we're trying to develop a strong relationship. So they've opened up trade. So even Trump and Modi had opened up trade lines, and reduced, taxation and, try to make it easier for us to be able to share products and services across, whether it be the food or gold. I remember there was a trade that I laughed about a few years ago was that India would trade their mangoes with the United States and we would give them Harley Davidson. And I was like laughing about like who was in the room that like weighed those two things and said mangoes for Harleys. I'm in. You sold me.
Well, it was obviously, to be fair, it's not like one mango for a Harley, right? It had to be like a bunch of mangoes for at least a Harley.
Exactly. I just thought it was.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
But yeah, so Trump and Modi have had a great relationship thus far. I think John Kelly has a great relationship with Modi. So whether or not, the thing of it is that right now everybody's kind of. I've even talked with some dignitaries who are kind of put their trips on pause until the summer, and I can't name any names because I'm actually going with them.
Yeah, I get you.
From the United States, but they're like, hey, Chris, we're going to go, but we have to wait till after the election so it doesn't look like we're trying to interfere.
Right.
I was like, yeah, we wouldn't want to look like we interfere with foreign elections.
Right,
That's horrible.
That's horrible. It's
for peace.
Yeah, we've only done like 80 between 1948 and 2000, but let's not split hairs. Just, come on. But
I know, right?
But to piggyback on your point, though, I think the reason why everyone's kind of getting more cozy with India is because, well, two things. For example, India and Turkey just started buying in the last year and a half. They just started buying their weapons from Russia and not the United States. And especially with Turkey being a NATO nation, that doesn't look good. The optics are bad. And then about the last 9-10 months, China started getting more and more off the dollar, and they developed a petro-yuan. And one of the things after the tariffs last year, for example, when we kind of fucked them over on soybeans, if you recall, so we had to subsidize our farmers because China said, fuck you, we're not buying soybeans. Well, they started buying their soybeans from India using the petro-yuan and not the dollar. And they sold 250 billion petro-yuan to Japan. So Japan's trying to get in on the action in case the dollar starts to not become the world currency. Once the dollar loses its status as the world currency, the reserve currency, things are going to get a little interesting. But so I think that's one reason why they're getting in bed with India and trying to massage that more is to make sure that we have some kind of control over commodities there. I mean, would that be too inaccurate to assume?
Absolutely. And you can honestly, just like we've been doing in technology, is outsourcing a lot of our technology to India because the cost of labor there is so inexpensive, it would blow your mind.
Mm.
And so if we can create a slave state, and I only say that, or an indenture, everybody gets hung up on the slavery.
It is what it is. No. It is what it is.
It is. And so what I tell people is that I travel with people, and so Americans go over there and they'll be like, how come there's not, so India does have a minimum wage, just so everybody knows that India does have a minimum wage, but I think it's nothing, And so when they talk about India trying to have a livable wage, though, Americans will go over there, but they'll never pay, like the companies would never pay their own employees. So the very people touting a livable wage in India would never pay it.
Right.
And the bureaucracy is such that, if I set up a company over there, no one's going to fire me. It's just like us, having Macy's make their clothes in some sweatshop in Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
It's until it becomes a PR disaster, there's no government entity that's going to go after me.
Right.
So I think that's why we want to, because of just the human capital that's available there. I mean, you're talking about I can't even remember what the population is, 1.3 billion.
Yeah.
It's roughly four times the size of the population of the United States that are dying to work. They'll take, that's why they can treat their employees so shitty, because there's 1,000 people waiting in line to get your job at the call center.
Right.
So it's tough. It's a real ordeal. I mean, the lines at the American embassy for Indians trying to get over to the United States or any developed country, for that matter, are amazing.
Yeah. Well, see, and then but this is the thing that you said a second ago, because you used the term slave state and you automatically started kind of almost apologizing for that term. It is what it is. I mean, that's what we do. We take countries that, we're going to do it with Venezuela. I don't want to get too into the weeds with Venezuela because we're talking about this, but we're getting ready to do that again. And Trump just, I think it was yesterday, said if you guys don't play ball, you're going to regret it. It's going to be really. I thought we were going to go in there to save those people for democracy. So we're going to kill a bunch of people for democracy. That's like me putting a knife in your back 9 inches, pulling it out 3 inches, and calling it progress. It's not. We're not in there for human rights. We would never do India for human rights. And that's the thing that kind of, I was talking with a guest the other day about this. It's just a matter of perspective. It's not like I want a pony. You're like, why couldn't we go into India and paying those guys $2 or $3 an hour like we do in Monterrey, Mexico, would be a fortune. But we don't. We try to get them for 15 cents. We try to get them for 15 cents a day and no bathroom breaks. You're saying that this one guy's paying $2,000 a year for rent? I mean, I don't know a single American that wouldn't take that deal, even on a studio apartment. If you said, "Hey, $200 a month, 600 square feet, I'll take it." They'll in a minute. But here, or in India rather, that's a lot of money to them. And if we were paying some guy $3 an hour. They would eat it up, and that would be an incredible lifestyle change for so many people. But we don't do that. Our mentality is like, well, how much cheaper can we get it for? And it's like, well, dude, you're gonna profit anyway. I mean, I'm not against profit. I am for a free market economy. I'm not for this crony capitalist suck the marrow out of the treasury stuff. But like, what kind of mentality do you see when you're out there and you run into Americans or American companies? Is it different than, say, the Chinese or the Russians? Is it a different attitude? I mean, what do you see when you're there?
So one of the big differentiators I see is it's funny is because we see like Bangalore as kind of the Silicon Valley of the East. And so we pride ourselves on everything that we're doing in software development and IT. However, when I look at just rebuilding infrastructure, when I look at the cities, the bridges and roads and so on and so forth, they build the roads by hand. And I talk to developers about this on buildings because I can't even imagine it would probably look like something like the Vietnam War if I were just to look at how many people died in work-related accidents. It's probably got to be an astronomical number because when you go out in the streets and you see them building the roads in busy cities by hand, and I'm talking about people taking buckets of cement and out there, and we're talking about children. I mean, there is no age limit on what, how old that kid could be up there stacking bricks or doing whatever, what have you. And when I talk to people, I'm like, well, why don't you just buy machines that do this? Why does it take 3 years, 4 years to build a house? This is some of these bridges that I've seen that are still under construction 10 years later. And so when I talk to people, and they're like, because it's cheaper to pay these people to do it by hand than it is to buy the machinery, and buy a skilled labor force to do it. I'm like, but how much are you losing on the back end? If it takes me 10 years to build a road, where I could have this, bridge or highway built in 6 months, it's just amazing to me that they still just look for the cheapest way to get something done, regardless of how much time it takes. But they get investors to do this. So they get investors to go and build some giant high rise. And if I was an investor and I looked at a building and I traveled there and I saw that they're building it by hand, I'd be mortified.
Okay, this is a stupid question. I know right away this is gonna be a stupid question because I'm in Austin, ton of construction. In fact, right by my house, there's a crane out there, a gazillion feet into the air, and I marvel at how they got the parts of the crane to the place and then put it all together. And now there's a guy in this little cart, running the crane back and forth and lifting these girders, like 70, 80, 100 feet into the air and then moving it over to this other thing. It's like, how do you build a building? Like some of the buildings I've seen in India are like modern buildings. How do you build a building that tall by hand? Like no machinery, no cranes, nothing?
No, they still have cranes in a lot of the urban areas, but if you would have looked, I mean, we're talking about they're like tree branches that are intertwined to create scaffolding.
Wow.
And I joke with some of the people that went on there. I'm just like, this definitely looks like something from the 1800s. The roads, the buildings, I mean, just like that, where you'll see people stacking cement in buckets or not even buckets, they're like tin bowls on top of their head, women, and then trying to carry them up these makeshift stairwells into the second, third, fourth, fifth stories. And what they do is as they're building up, the workers move, so you'll see their clothes dangling in the wind, they're cooking food at night, and they actually live on the job site.
Wow.
So it's not like these workers, go home and have a nice meal and this and that. I've delivered water and food and ice cream to workers on properties before because all they do is from, the first thing they do when they get up to when they go to bed is that they just keep working. Mm-hmm. And they're mixing the cement by hand. They're carrying the bricks by hand. And it would mortify anybody, especially if you're like a union person. You'd be like, no, stop. Everybody quit working. You have violated every
OSHA, yeah,
whatever.
OSHA, baby. Yeah. Oh no, about 10 years ago, you and I have some friends in common. About 10 years ago, we were traveling through central Mexico, San Miguel de Allende, and we got dropped off at the edge of town. There's like a cool restaurant there, and we walked over, and my buddy noticed this glass blowing factory, and he's all artsy craftsy. So hey, let's go look at the. So we walked on top of this hill, and there was like a window there, and you could see. And this wasn't like a tour of the glass blowing factory. This was just like us sticking our head in a window of a factory, and I'm talking big, huge, hot orange hunks of glass, being taken out of a furnace or whatever it's called. And moved over to this dude who takes the glob and starts blowing it and molding it into vases and jars and stuff. And they're wearing like Birkenstocks and little pants, shorts, like surfer shorts. There's this one chick I never forget, like Mexican supermodel. She's wearing these tiny little Daisy Dukes, this little midriff, and she's handling glass at like 4,000 degrees. I'm thinking, she dropped, and she's wearing these tiny little flip flops. I'm like she's going to go to the beach. I'm like, Jesus Christ, if she dropped that on her foot, and if that dude like just skinned his leg barely with that, that's like pain strongly, right? no OSHA,
Right.
none of that. And I'm thinking people here have no idea. You're talking about scaffolding. I was in Guanajuato, and we were outside. We were getting some food at this one joint. Outside across the street, these guys were rehabbing this church, and there's no scaffolding at all. They were kind of like rappelling down like Batman and hanging from a rope to paint the place. And I'm like, man, you think you got a tough job, right? And, the bucket was kind of hung on their belt, and you're going, Jesus Christ! It's like, yeah, man, no, it's tough all over. People don't get it. Not to say that we can't do better, but we could do a lot worse.
No, absolutely, but they don't. But there's not a large, there was with the taxi cabs in Mumbai. They did have some of the taxi companies. They did actually protest the working conditions for taxi cab drivers. And I think a large part of that was the fact that, so they have their taxi cabs and they also have rickshaw, the auto rickshaw, the little golf carts that you see. And so they actually protested the working conditions there because I think for one is that they didn't set, I have to believe in my heart that they did not set a limit for the number of taxi cabs and rickshaw that they have in any given city. It was basically, if you want a cab, here you go. And so you got workers sleeping in their cars all night. They make no money whatsoever, and then they were paying the taxi company at the end of the day a larger portion than what is even deemed necessary. So they're really just working to eat, and that's it.
Right.
And it was tragic. And I think a lot of the workers, they won't unionize, they won't protest en masse because they're afraid of, well, there's nothing else. And I think that's where a lot of people misunderstand sweatshops. There's not sweatshops because they have better places that they can go and work. There are no other options.
Right.
So if they don't accept this, the scraps, and it really makes you sick when you go up the food chain and see how the people at the top are living like kings,
right.
Who damn well know where everybody's working. We've seen it here.
Sure we do. Sure we do. And this is the thing I never understood. Like when people act like you're trying to, this is why I hate the term wealth redistribution, because it makes it sound like I'm going to go get your shit and take it from you. We all pay taxes, and we're not going to get that money back. I just want to see the taxes we pay equitably used, not just for war, which 60 cents on the dollar goes to war. Not even war, corporate interests, because we're not defending shit, right? No, my freedoms are not in danger in Syria. My freedoms are not in danger in Venezuela, right? Despite what Bill Maher says, because he's a fucking prick. But the other part of it is that if a wealthy corporation paid, like, say, 5% in taxes, which the last more than a couple of decades now, a lot of these guys just get away with fucking murder when it comes to federal income tax. If they paid 5% of their corporate gross, which was the boon of our economy, if you recall, when the marginal tax rate was 90%, we actually had a thriving middle class. We had a combination of FDR's federal jobs. He provided 15 million jobs, not welfare for 15 million people, 15 million jobs. And then the boon in manufacturing with unions and a captive audience, because you couldn't manufacture overseas and then sell it back here. That was illegal before 1961. And so now what we've got is you got $50,000 a year people crowing about the marginal tax rate. Like, first of all, you're never going to make $10 million a year. Never, ever, ever. So that doesn't even apply to you. And so, but they just want to sell out their own interests on a regular basis. I mean, do you find that in India? Do the you said that they don't really have a whole lot of hope, but do the so-called minions or whatever, do they ever like think, oh no, you can't tax the wealthy because that would be bad. One day I hope to be wealthy. Did they labor into that delusion like we do here?
I'd have to take a look at what their tax rate is. There's a big defense for because they all aspire to that. If you watch Indian television or you watch any Bollywood films, they give you, of course, kind of like Hollywood. Hollywood, when you go international, most people think that all American soldiers are 6'8", bulking, supermodels, just, muscles,
Yeah.
and these action heroes and everything. And a lot of people that's what they think of Americans. Now I think that's fading because of social media. We see a lot of the problems with, people are talking about depression and obesity and, income inequality and da. So I think that American dream is starting to fade. Where I've talked to foreigners, I just talked to a guy in India who actually had no interest in ever moving to the United States. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Given the opportunity, you would turn it down. But I still see, I see a defense of people because they still idolatrize wealthy people there. So you can see them at the airports, and when I go to functions, I can always pick out who the wealthy person is because it almost looks like people like biting around them like en masse, 10, 20 people. You don't even have to know who the guy is. But you can see all the other people that they honestly look like they're cowering down to like pick up scraps. Like if he were to drop something out of his pocket, there would be somebody there to pick it up. And so I would have to believe, without actually knowing what the tax rates look like in India and then I know they serve the rich because it's the wealthy people it's the same process. It's the wealthy people put their politicians in place that turn around and do favors for them. And that was one of the large complaints about Modi during the last, 4 years was the fact that there was a lot of corruption scandal where people were like, hey, Modi had to have known or been complicit in this endeavor. Like there's no way that this, Exhibit A could have happened without Modi knowing.
Right.
And so that's a lot of his opposition are using that as fuel to be like, hey, you knew about this, and he's like, no, I didn't have an idea, So I'd have to do it.
Let me ask you how wrapping up. We got a few minutes, but so kind of a little off topic, but not really. You've been in India a ton. Obviously you're dialed in with some heavy hitters line of work you're doing there the last 10, 12 years. What do you see their election integrity being like? I mean, how are the elections run in India, say, compared to England? Fuck the United States. We are compromised up the ass. People keep crowing about our democracy. Yeah, whatever. 2 words: super delegates. Go fuck yourself. But in England, for example, they got a parliamentary system, right? And they got multiple parties, not just a couple. So how does India's system compare to, say, even though it's largely probably still British roots? I mean, what have they evolved? What do they do different than say England or even France?
So it's built on the British system. So it's equal there is that they have a president and they also have a prime minister. Now the prime minister, even though he's inducted by the president of the country, the prime minister has basically supreme rule. And so I want to say, they basically rule over the parliament, and which is different than the president. The president, I'm not even wholly confident in his extent of their executive powers any more than just being a placeholder, because in the country they never really talk about the president. I mean, if I could, I can go back like 1 year and talk about like who the last president was, and then not remember any of the ones prior to that. But the democratic process has kind of been a farce in my eyes from a foreigner standpoint, because when you look at after their independence, so I think it was 1947, I think it was. This guy Jawaharlal Nehru became the first prime minister, and he was part of what they call the Indian National Congress. And the Congress Party ruled in and out for the better part of India's history since its independence. I mean, if you look at some of the other prime ministers that also, you had mentioned Indira Gandhi. So Indira Gandhi is the daughter of Nehru.
Okay.
So then if you were to go back, she regained power again, only to pass it on to her husband, Rajiv Gandhi, who was in power as well. Then to go down, I know that their son, Rahul Gandhi, who's kind of a thorn in the side, but he's kind of inept, if you will. I think he's been in the, been just he's one of those spoiled rich kids that thinks everything's just due to him. So he's not willing to really work to become prime minister. He just thinks he should get it. But I'm like, there's no democracy where one candidate can, lose 1 point and then come back and regain it again. And when one party, and not just one party, one family has maintained decades of control over India, that's not a democracy. That shit doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
And Raul is another, I think he's one of the candidates that's up for this new election here. But there's really a snowball's chance in hell that he's going to win. I think he just does it because, he likes to, I can't say it to his party lifestyle, but the few times that I've seen him, I'm like, he's drunk.
The one and only answer, he's drunk.
You see him in public, he's all like red-faced, and it's just funny that I'm like, I don't know if I trust this guy.
Right.
So.
That's hilarious.
But you gotta, we'll see how it looks for this one. But I think that democracy, unless we have strong campaign finance rules in place, that goes for India as well.
Sure,
I mean, I think that Modi had a strong control. He owned the media for the most part. And I don't know if it's like he's the CEO, but the bought and paid for media. So basically all mass media in India could not say anything negative about him. He made monetary promises, essentially paid for votes. I think he actually paid for votes. I think there was actually money transferred so that he would buy rural votes. They bought buses to ship poor people from rural India over to the voting stations and so on and so forth. And I just think that until those campaign finance laws are refined and enforced, that you'll never actually see a real democracy in India. But I know America's over there probably beating the drums loudly because they want, as they do in every other country, to have their guy in power. And I'm really not confident if Modi is the U.S. guy right now because Modi has, shown just as much interest in China and Russia and Saudi Arabia as the United States. So I think they're kind of like, well, I'm not really sure he's our guy.
Oh, they're sure he's not. Trust me. When the Venezuela fracas is over and we got their oil, believe it, we're going to start. Rachel Madcow is going to start saber rattling India, and talking about their nukes and this and that and the other, and how they're unstable, and we're going to justify going into India to get our guy in there. In fact, I'm going to declare myself. Declare myself the Prime Minister of India right now, and hide out in the little Longhorn Saloon chicken shack in the basement until further notice. That's what I think I'll do. And then,
well, I don't want to go long, but you know what's funny about what you just said? Did you know you can? So
even not an Indian citizen.
In the Indian government, it is not against the law. So I, as a foreign person, can run for office in India.
Oh, you could run for, but you can't declare yourself.
No, well, yeah, you can't declare.
Right.
I mean,
there's
can,
some,
I don't know how far it's going to go.
Well, it's about as far as it would go if Nancy Pelosi stood up and declared herself president of the United States. That's what this whole, that's a whole another topic for another time. But
exactly.
Hey guys, we're out of.
Well, I just wanted to let you know, anybody on the phone that wants to, or anybody listening in that wants to run for office in India, you do not have to be an Indian to do so. So good luck.
Okay. Well, and Godspeed and fly low and avoid the radar. Folks, our guest has been Chris Ward, and we've been talking about Russia and China and India. Oh my! And again, you can also visit patreon.com/thebittertruth and get all the links and whatever essays we throw up there. Also, we're on all the usual suspects, whatever platforms you like to listen to podcasts on. And as always, guys, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.